Reopening old wounds. France pulls out of events to mark the 20th anniversary of the genocide in Rwanda, accused of complicity in the killings. But how much of a setback is this for Rwanda as it strives to move on from its darkest days? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Commemorations for the 20th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide have been overshadowed by a fallout with France. Rwanda's President Paul Kagame has accused France of helping with the 1994 mass killings of at least 800,000 people, mainly ethnic Tutsis. Well, in an interview with a French magazine, Kagame says, 20 years later, in their eyes, the only thing they think they can be held against them is that they didn't do enough to save more lives during the genocide. When he goes on, that's a fact, but it hides the main point, the direct role of Belgium and France in the political preparation of the genocide and the participation of the latter in its very execution. Well, France denies the accusations and is refusing to take part in Monday's events to mark the anniversary. All of that rekindling the debate about what role France played in Rwanda at the time, as Nadine Barber reports now from Paris.
When Rwanda's genocide began, Venuste Kayemahe had been working at Kigali's French-Rwandan Cultural Centre for years. So he, his wife and two of his children sought refuge there, sending the rest of his family to stay with relatives. He says he asked French officials for help, in vain.
We were evacuated to Nairobi by the Belgian army after the French army refused to do so. But my oldest daughter, my mother, my sisters, my brother, my brothers-in-law, my nieces and my nephews were all exterminated.
Like many Rwandan Tutsis, Venuste believes France is still in denial. Paris sent 2,500 soldiers as part of Operation Turquoise. They arrived under a United Nations mandate 11 weeks after the massacres started. Some Rwandans have accused French troops of participating in atrocities including the rape and killing of civilians. Those charges have always been strongly denied by the military. A more common accusation is that the operation offered protection to Hutu militias fleeing Rwanda. But the general who was in charge says that's nonsense.
The
French were the only ones, along with a few African states, who dared to go there to stop the massacres, which were still going on when we got there, whereas the other major nations did nothing. So France can be proud of this intervention, which saved tens of thousands of lives.
But campaigners say it's still much too early for France to turn the page on the tragic events of 20 years ago. Nadine Barber, Al Jazeera, Paris.
Well, let's bring in our panel of guests now. In Kigali, we're joined by Simon Adams, Executive Director at the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. In Paris, we have François Géret, a historian and the founding president of the French Strategic Analysis Institute. And also in Kigali, Robert Ford, a veteran Rwandan journalist and businessman. Thank you all for joining us. Let's start with Simon, if we could. What does Rwanda really want from France? Is it just about an apology or legal proceedings against some of the most senior French officials of the time?
No, I don't think it's a legal issue. I think what they're really looking for, and I heard the foreign minister actually say this earlier today, is they're looking for France to accept the truth about its past involvement with the regime which ultimately carried out the genocide here. I think it's very unfortunate at this point that it ends up now being a slanging match between the presidents of France and the president of Rwanda, because 20 years after the genocide, I think it's very important for all the international community to reflect on the fact that it abandoned Rwandans in 1994 and left them to their fate. And I think it would be a good time for France to reflect upon the history of its previous involvement with the regime that ultimately carried out the genocide.
All right, François, if it's just about an admission, perhaps an apology, why is France holding back?
No, I think that in principle it's impossible for France as a whole and the present French government to accept those accusations. It has been a terrible moment. It has been extremely complex and confusing. And it's absolutely outrageous to hear that French soldiers and officers took party and participated into the horrors which took place. We can look carefully at the event. We can cooperate with the Rwandan government in order to bring together all the elements we can get. We can study the archives which still exist, and we can cooperate, for instance, in the framework of a bilateral commission to find out what happened exactly and who is responsible for what.
All right, but Belgium has gone further than France, hasn't it? Belgium has given an apology. Why is France not able to make that move?
Well, if you apologize, you have to know exactly about what. And you cannot apologize about vague accusation or accusation that are intended to reject responsibility on France. I think that no French government from the right, from the left, would accept to become the scapegoat of a situation where the main responsibility was in the hand of those who have committed the act and who have engaged into the genocide process.
Let me bring Robert Ford into the discussion. What we're hearing from people like Francois, there is a willingness to look at the evidence, perhaps. Why haven't we seen international legal organizations show that willingness to look into the evidence? Why haven't we seen any sort of international legal action to look at the sort of accusations which Rwanda has made since 2008 in its reports, saying they have evidence that France participated in the genocide by arming some of the genocidal elements of the then government, training them, giving them political support? Why isn't this gone before any international court?
I think that's a very interesting scenario to look at. First of all, France will not accept responsibility at this point or come up and say, we participated in the genocide, because of one very critical and important reason. That the moment they make that acceptance, the moment they come out clean and say, we participated in the genocide, that means that they would also have to accept that a lot of facts that implicate them in their direct role in the genocide would also have to come out.
All right, I think Jere wants to add something here. I could see you shaking your head a second ago. Very briefly before we move forward. Go ahead, Jere.
No, I think that we are in the very classic situation in which on the ground there are people who are responsible for the most terrible, the most tragic actions. And on the other hand, you try to put together two words. One is France and the other is genocide. But it doesn't work that way.
All right.
Because France can be accused for some lack of activities. But when we act, for instance, in Central Africa or elsewhere, we demonstrate that we are not taking side. We are trying to keep peace, stability, and avoid that kind of behavior.
All right, got it. Got the message down. I'm glad you raised Central African Republic. Simon, has the world really learned the lessons of Rwanda when you read reports by Amnesty International from February of this year saying that Muslims are being ethnically cleansed not too far away in Central African Republic? Or you read about the plight of Muslims and Rohingyas while the West seems to be economically opening up to the regime in Myanmar. Have we learned anything from Rwanda?
No, look, I think you raise a really good point, and it's interesting you mentioned Central African Republic, where, of course, there are French peacekeepers there, and there are also Rwandan peacekeepers there at the very moment trying to end the ethno-religious cleansing. And I think in relation to the previous discussion, it's a mistake to see this as a legal question or get too bogged down in that. This is really about what you just asked then. What has been learnt in the 20 years since Rwanda? Because the lesson of Rwanda was a lesson about political indifference and political inaction when a country and a people were facing the worst crimes that can possibly be imagined. And I think it's incumbent upon France to do a little bit more self-reflection and examination. But it has to be said that since then, France has played a positive role in some of these situations, as I said, Central African Republic. But I think more generally in the United Nations and in terms of the international community, we face the constant struggle of trying to make sure that we match the pretty words up with actual deeds to help people wherever they are in the world who faced these most conscience-shocking crimes, because we do have a responsibility to protect, and that's a collective thing.
All right, let's look at perhaps the domestic situation in Rwanda. Might look a little more pretty than the international ability to improve things. Well, Rwanda, of course, has come a long way over the past 20 years, with the government making major investments in the health and education sectors. Life expectancy, for example, has doubled since the genocide in 1994. And Rwanda's GDP growth of 8% makes it one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. That's brought with it much needed foreign investment, though the country still relies on foreign aid for around 20% of its national budget. And though Rwanda is home to a growing middle class, some 60% of the population still has to deal with extreme poverty. Let's come back to Robert. A lot of the indicators I'm mentioning there, they look extremely positive. Why has Rwanda done so well compared to other countries which have emerged from terrible tragedies?
I think thank you very much for that question. I think it's because of Rwanda's history, Rwanda's resilience, and Rwanda's effort to be able to see forward and look beyond the genocide and be able to repair the fabric of the society that was broken down by the genocide. Of course, also with the great visionary leadership that Rwanda has had over the past 20 years. It wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have the leadership that there is in place today. As a veteran journalist, I was in Rwanda, I experienced what happened soon after the genocide, the trauma that people in this country lived with, the justice system, the rebuilding the media so that people can build trust in the media and look at it as the media that was not the media killing them, but now the media that is focusing on reconstruction, reform, and reconciliation. So when you put all those items together, it gives a very good reason why Rwanda has made remarkable achievements over the past 20 years.
All right, Robert, I'm glad you mentioned, if I may interrupt you there, I'm glad you mentioned the media. Simon, when it comes to the media, political freedoms, I was reading, for example, Freedom House, what they say. They say the media is very tightly controlled by the government. They give examples of journalists who have been jailed for defaming the president and attacking state security. There's definitely a lot of positive indicators, but it doesn't look like they're all positive, are they?
Well, I think it would be fair to say that if you looked at any country and reflected on the track record of any country, there's an element of human rights need to be upheld in every single country. But I think just in relation to that question and into the previous one as well, it's remarkable the progress that's been made here in the last 20 years. And I can't think of another example in the world where perpetrator and victim have had to live next to each other, side by side, and try to come to terms with that history. And I think that absolutely should be applauded. I mean, I would like to see that Rwanda now takes that a step even further and continues to expand support for human rights and for democracy in this country. But I think the progress that has been made in the last 23 years is absolutely remarkable.
All right, Francois, has the international community found the right balance? All right, Robert, go ahead, yes.
If I may add on what he just said, when you concentrate on isolated issues about small journalists being locked up, I think it's very important that we should focus on the wider idea, the wider reforms that have been made in the media in Rwanda. The Rwanda media has been liberalized, you have radio stations, people are free to say what they can be able to say. You have the Media High Council now, which is a self-regulatory media body that is not controlled by the state. All this has come in place in this time and era. Of course, there will be elements that we want to despise what government is doing. There will be elements that we want to fight the progress that the government has achieved over many years. And what Rwanda has come out to say is like, look, you can practice journalism, but you have to practice within the framework of an accepted legal structure. Everywhere in the world this happens. It's not just in Rwanda, it's everywhere in the world. So I think it's better that we should focus on the achievement in the reform of the media that Rwanda has achieved than in isolated cases of where one journalist or two journalists could have gone to prison for malpractice.
All right, well, it's Freedom House that I'm quoting here, not my analysis, and they have more than the names of one or two. But anyway, Francois, has the international community found the right balance in dealing with Rwanda when it comes to aid versus investment, when it comes to ensuring that your helping hand turns into a sustainable development process?
Certainly, there is a strong effort to strike the right balance. And there are now new mechanisms which allow to look after the funding and to control the use of the funds. Having said that, we are still far from absolute transparency. And one key element, not only in Rwanda, but in other emerging African countries, we see a lot of growth. We see a transformation of the countries, but we are still waiting for key elements for a full success. And those elements are the promotion of democracy, the respect of human rights, the respect of freedom of speech and freedom of the media, and ultimately a fair share of the new wealth between all the elements of the population. And so far, we see too many cases and too many situations in which the poorest remains at the same level and do not benefit enough from the growth and the welfare.
Right, there's a lot to think about that, but let's talk a little bit about the rapid population growth in Rwanda since the end of the genocide 20 years ago. And for a new generation, there is a determination to learn from the past. Catherine Soy reports from Kibuye in western Rwanda.
Agatha Uwizihia was only 3 when Hutu militiamen killed her parents and 3 older brothers. Hutu neighbors saved her life and that of her younger brother by hiding them. At 23, she doesn't dwell on the past.
I want to move on with my life. Even I don't want to know this is Tutsi, this is Hutu. In this period of 94, I feel like paining because I know I don't have parents because they've been killed. But I don't really want to focus on that.
That's why hopes of a fully united Rwanda are pegged on its young people. Every month, they come from different parts of the country to discuss issues that affect them. Everything from the country's laws, employment, being patriotic, and moving the country forward. In schools, the history of genocide is a mandatory part of the curriculum. Nearly every child born after the massacre knows exactly what happened.
These children know all about the history of their country, about the genocide and what caused it. They're taught about the importance of reconciliation and the power of tribal divisions. Many say that this generation is crucial in ensuring that what happened in 1994 never happens again.
That message is one Joseph Harindiwari constantly passes on to his grandchild Clementine. Harindiwari, a Hutu, protected his Tutsi wife from killers by bribing them, but he was later sentenced to 10 years in prison for killing other Tutsis.
I keep telling her that we are all the same, that I was told that we cannot coexist, but look at us now.
Harindiwari says he grew up being constantly reminded by his parents, neighbors, and the government that Tutsis are enemies. He wants a different destiny for Clementine. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera, Kibuye, Western Rwanda.
Well, Simon, looking to the future generation, to what extent have the ethnic and tribal divisions been healed, and is a stronger national Rwandan identity being strengthened?
No, I think there is definitely a sense now that people think of themselves as Rwandan rather than identifying as Tutsi or Hutu, and I think that's a very important thing, and it's remarkable to me. I've been coming to this country for a number of years, and it's remarkable to me that we're now 20 years on from the genocide. So there's an entire generation who have grown up with no direct experience of that, but have heard about it through those who are older than them. So that gives one a great hope in the future, and I think we can certainly try and see that the lessons of Rwanda are learned in other situations, because I think these commemorations give us an opportunity not for just hand-wringing or not for just standing around and uttering those words never again, and then allowing the sorts of things that happened in Rwanda or are happening in CAR or elsewhere to happen again and again and again. They're actually an opportunity for us to commit ourselves to making sure that no people go through what Rwandans went through in 1994.
All right, if I could bring Francois into the discussion, while a lot of fingers are being pointed at Paris, some say, looking at how internally, for example, the Gagaka court system has handled things, it's been effective on the plus side, it's got through a lot of cases, but has it dealt with all the allegations against members of the ruling party, the RPF, as efficiently as it's dealt with allegations against others?
Yeah, I would like to mention that when you are talking about the future is, I would say, probably now at school. When a country, when a generation has to live with such a memory, it deserves a proper education. That means that the young children of today deserve a fair school teaching about what happened. And there are also many possibilities to bring together all the members of the communities in order to try to explain and to understand how to avoid the possibility of something like that.
All right,
so I insist very much on that.
All right, we've got just a minute left. Let me try and bring in Robert very briefly there. To move on, I guess you need a fair share of identity, wealth, and accountability. Have you got all those in Rwanda right now, especially given the criticisms I was mentioning of the Gakaka court systems as not going after people connected to the ruling party as toughly as others?
I think if we want to analyze properly the Gacaca system, we have to separate it from the classical justice system that we have known, because the classical justice system is going to have a winner and is going to have a loser. But the Gacaca system was built on the hypothesis that both the accuser and the accused actually become winners at the end of the day. And if it had not been done in this way, I don't think Rwanda would have managed to achieve a lot of what has achieved in the justice system. The future of my country is very, very bright. It's a very bright future. Rwanda has come from far away. I was part of this system before. I'm part of this community today. And when you look at Rwanda of 1994 and Rwanda of 2014, 20 years down the road, the progress is remarkable.
All right, now we'll have to end it and thank our guests, Simon Adams and Robert Ford in Kigali and Francois Géré in Paris. And thank you for joining us here in this edition of Inside Story. Do please send us your thoughts and comments via Facebook and Twitter. I'm Sami Zeidan. Thanks for watching. It's goodbye for now.